You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com. Hello, everybody. I'm Nadira Jamal, the Belly Dance Geek, and welcome to episode 56 of the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. This is a place where dancers can get together and geek out on all of those topics that are hard to get in classes and on DVDs. If you want help with the what, so things like moves, combos, choreographies, it's really easy to find resources. But if you're looking for help with the why and the how, musicality, culture, business, history, all of that stuff can be a little bit harder to find. So every month I interview a different guest expert on a different geeky topic, and we always have time for questions and answers so you can geek out too. So if you think that knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you are in the right place. My guests tonight are two of the ladies from the Origins Folkloric Dance Company. That's a professional ensemble dedicated to performing ethnic dances from the Middle East and North Africa. The troupe officially formed in September of 2011 after teaming up at Katya of Boston's Middle Eastern dance retreats to perform her folkloric dances. In addition to staging two productions of their own, the troupe has performed at the New England Folk Festival, Karim Nagy's Farewell Show, the Hudson River Shakespeare's production of Cleopatra, Ricasa East, Cairo Cabaret, and many other regional workshop shows and haflas. Company members have received training from many leading scholars and performers of folkloric dance, including Katya of Boston, Morwena Asaf, Sahra Saida, Mahmoud Reda, Ibrahim Farah, Karim Nagy, Rehan, and Kay Hardy Campbell. You can check them out at originsfolkloricdance.com. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
All right, so today Origins is going to talk about presenting folklore on stage. But before we get too far into that, I would love to hear from each of you and your origin stories, how you got started in the belly dance and folkloric dance world. Amy, would you like to start?
Sure. So I've been dancing for over 20 years. I started in like a vintage American cabaret style. About 10 years ago, I started attending Katya of Boston's retreats. And that's where I started or developed an interest in folkloric dance because Katya is very dedicated to that and always taught a folkloric choreography. And that's how I got started with Origins.
Great. Now, Amy, I'm getting a little bit of echo from you. Do one of you guys have your sound playing in the same room?
We are sitting in the same room with our phones. Let me move away.
All right, that might be the problem. I'm sorry for the interruption.
My apologies. Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. And did you finish telling your story, Amy?
Yeah, another thing to know about me is I produce or publish Belly Dance New England. It's an online webzine where you can find out what's happening with belly dance all over New England.
Awesome. And folks might recognize you from a previous Clubhouse episode. You were one of our first guests. I think you were the second or the third guest.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, awesome. And Margaret, would you like to tell us about your origin story?
Yes. I originally got introduced to the belly dance in 1976. I took classes at the Woburn YMCA. Then a few years later, my husband and I moved up to Groton, Massachusetts, that had a small center for the arts, and I took classes there. And from then, I have continued studying with many dance teachers from Massachusetts, including Morwena Asaf and Katya. Starting in about 1984, I started traveling to attend workshops all over the country, and I just fell in love with the dance and have continued to this day. I have been a member of various dance troupes along the way, including Roxanne Noir in the 1990s, Polynesian dance troupe in 1989, and later Origins.
Excellent.
I also am the owner of the Enchanted Caravan, which sells belly dance supplies.
Awesome. Now, I would also love to hear more of the story of Origins. We covered, a little bit of it in your introduction, but is there more that you'd like to tell us about your story, about how you came up with the idea, or maybe your influences or your mission?
Certainly. Excuse me a minute. I need to cough.
We're all
As
feeling
you
that.
said, yes. All of the original members of Origins, we met through attending Katya's annual dance retreats. And at one point, Katya always taught during her retreat an Oriental choreography and a folkloric dance. And I think that's where most of the members of Origins started to develop a love for folkloric along with the Oriental. In September of 2011, we were asked by Katya to perform one of her folkloric dances, a Tunisian dance, at the second Mass Rocks, which we did. And we loved dancing as a group and loved dancing folkloric so much that we had a lunch meeting and we all decided we'd love to dance together, and that was the beginning of Origins. Our influences have been many because each of the members have brought, along with Katya's influence, the other teachers that they have had. Again, you had mentioned Morwana Isaf, Katya, Mahmoud Reda, and we just, part of the reason we have continued is we love dancing together and we love folkloric. Amy, do you have anything to add?
No, that was pretty good. And maybe we could give a little shout out to the other members. I'd like to, we have Karen Kempsky Aquino, you might know as Namid, and she's been dancing for, longer than I have. In addition to being a beautiful dancer, and she's choreographed several of Origins dancers. She's a bookkeeper. She takes care of Origins books. And we also are very up to have with us Ann Lucas.
Amy, I'm
who
going to
might
interrupt you
know.
for a second, if I may. We're getting some more echo again. Do you mind switching spots one more time?
Switching what? Okay, walk away.
Sorry about that. We're getting some pretty severe echo.
That's so weird.
Maybe
That
another
better?
thing to ask is folks who are listening on the webcast, if you wouldn't mind typing in on the right-hand side, if you're hearing echo as well, it might entirely be on my end hearing that. We'll find out. I just moved to a new place, and my internet speed test said we were doing pretty well, but you never know. I'm down in the basement now because we have a basement.
Oh.
It's magic. For folks who don't know the Boston area, we have a lot of tiny apartments.
Like tiny apartments and very busy internet.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any notes from the listeners, and you're sounding a little bit better, so maybe we should go ahead and proceed. So sorry for the interruption. You were telling us
Oh,
about
that's
some
okay.
of the other members.
Yeah, I was going to tell you about Ann Lucas. And Ann is actually an ethnomusicologist who teaches Middle Eastern music at Boston College. So she's been a great addition and for us. And maybe Margaret, do you want to cover the other parts of the crew?
Yes. We have 4 other members. One is Shalimar Robin Kelsey from Connecticut. She's been dancing for 42 years. She's been a student, an instructor, and the director of Troupe Little Egypt. She also, for many years, ran the dance show down at Marco Polo in Hartford, Connecticut. Then we have, looking at my notes, Laura Zana, who started studying in Connecticut with Gia, Suad, and then Shalimar, who she has danced with for 20 years and is also a member of Little Egypt. Kitty, who started dancing in 2002 with Shalimar, who is also a member of Troupe Little Egypt. And then we have Suad, Nancy Barrett, who started in Wisconsin with Peggy Booth, and while she was still there and when she moved to Connecticut, attended many of Ibrahim Bobby Farah's week-long intensives. And she's also the director of the Desert Moon Dancers, who celebrated their 25th year as a troupe last year in 2016. So we have a wonderful group of dancers with many years of experience and many different influences.
Lovely. All right. Well, let's jump into the main part of the interview. So, let's start from the very beginning. What is folkloric dance exactly? How do you define it?
Well, it's Amy here. Folkloric dance is like folk dance is done in groups, always performed in groups. But in our opinion, Origin's opinion, folkloric dance is how you represent folk dance. Folk dance is what the people do. You go to the Athenian corner, for example, and Yanni gets up and does a medico. That's folk dance. But folkloric dance is how we present it and how we put it on the stage. Folkloric dance is choreographed. We have to develop a character. We have to present some kind of energy and cohesiveness and put the dance in context. So it's almost like folkloric dance taken out of its. Folkloric dance is like folk dance taken out of the everydayness of the culture. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a question then is, what role do the folk dances play in the cultures that belly dance comes from specifically?
Well, I think every culture has dance, has music, has song, or singers. It's part of the celebration, right? You dance at weddings, you dance at funerals, you dance at parties. Although there is we've heard this, and it's not, I know it's true, but folk dance may even have had a role in the construction of homes. Debki, the word debki, which is a Lebanese folk dance, means to stomp. And when I was noodling around looking at the background of debki and history, they say it comes from the building of the sod homes in the Lebanese countryside, and they would have to stomp the roofs down. So it even has construction value.
Nice. Now, my understanding is that folk dance and also folkloric dance, as you've defined it, comes in some different flavors. Can you tell us about some of those, some of the different contexts and the different ways that plays out?
You mean flavors in terms of?
Well, so for example, there are the folk dances that people do in social settings, and there are people like you who present them on stage, and those come in anything from I know, for example, there are one of my friends who's from Turkey used to be a PE teacher, and they taught folk dance in PE class, and then there are professional troops and social troops and all kinds of other things. How is folk and folkloric dance presented in the various Middle Eastern cultures?
All right. One of our main influences and our source of so much information is Sarah Saida out of California. She teaches Journey Through Egypt, which is a 4-session course. And the way she presents folklore, the folk dancing, the dancing of Egypt, and that's what she has studied, is she thought of it as different tables. The first table is the dance you see the people doing in the village at their celebrations. Then the second table is the local belly dancer. And she might take some of the steps that they used as part of her routine. Then you have the local dance troupe, which again, they're going to take the folk dance and they are going to present it in a little more stylized form. Then Egypt is divided into governments, and the governments also have their folkloric troops. And again, they're a little more professional. and they take the folk dance and make it stage ready, which again we'll get in a little bit later with some of your other questions. And then from there you have the national folkloric companies, and in Egypt it was the Raider Troupe and the Kamea. And what they would do is they would go to the villages, the regions of Egypt. They would observe and study the folk dances, the folk steps. Then they would take it back, choreograph a dance based on the folk steps, and adding other dance movements to make it more interesting for the audience. And then the last table was the Cairo dancer, which would be the Oriental dancer. So I don't know whether that helps you see how the folk dance gets transformed into folkloric. Now, the Cairo dancer might have in her routine sections of music that would be based on folk music. For instance, the Saidi portion or a Zar portion. Does that help?
Absolutely. And if folks are interested, Sahara actually talked about that in a lot more depth, the tables concept, in her episode, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We'll share a link to that in the show notes as well. But I just have to put in a second shout out because she is such a great resource.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that table metaphor has been invaluable, really, for helping us think about how what kind of dance you're talking about, and also just to elaborate a little bit too. Even at the first table, the dance done in the village, there's even inside dance and outside dance too. There's the dance the women may do in the home, but they wouldn't do outside. And then there's a dance you do maybe out in public, like outside a cafe or something. So anyway, it's just sort of interesting. I know Sarah talks about inside dance and outside dance too.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So why is it valuable for belly dancers to learn folkloric dances?
Well, it's the roots, really. The belly dance that, as we know and perform in the clubs or on stage these days, I guess, this is where it comes from. This is where the folk dance, belly dance comes from folk dance. So it's always good to know the roots of what your chosen art form is. I'm sorry, yes, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Also, learning folkloric dances, a dancer will learn more of the feeling, the character, and the movements of the culture. If you go to, I think, Amy, did you already mention the Athenian Corner?
Yes, she did. And for the folks who are outside of New England, that's one of the major live music venues in the Boston area.
Mm-hmm. So if you go to the Athenian Corner, when you see the regular customers getting up to dance, if you watch them dancing and you watch, say, the women, you'll see how they hold themselves. So that you have the feeling. If you watch them moving their hands, you get a feeling of where a lot of our hand and our movements have come from. So, it's folkloric dances, folk dances, but basically the base of what we learned is Oriental.
Mm-hmm. And for
Also,
folks who are not, go ahead.
I was going to chime in too. And tribal style dancers have a direct lineage with a folkloric basis. So Masha Archer, who was Carolina Noricchio's teacher, was a member of Balanat, which was a seminal folkloric dance troupe in California, in San Francisco. Also, Carolina Noricchio herself is rumored to have gotten inspired to create American tribal style from learning about Gwazi dance from Aisha Ali. The Gwazi dancers cue each other vocally when to change dance steps, just like ATS.
Cool. And I think that another thing that's, besides the the practical connection too. I think it's also, just a nice touch of respect, even if regardless of how traditional you are trying to be or not trying to be. It's good to show interest in things that you don't necessarily plan to present on stage as they are just because they're a part of the culture, and it's good to acknowledge that.
Definitely.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Excellent. So what are some examples of specific folkloric dances that belly dancers might want to learn or might benefit from learning?
Well, for instance, sometimes you can throw a little kaligi into your routine. Also the belly part of the routine, or the Saidi part, or even Lebanese Samai, which I have heard recently being put into some of the Oriental dance routines. And then, of course, you have the Turkish 9/8.
All right.
We don't think of the 9/8 as a folk dance, but it is. It comes from the Roma culture. So, yeah. Yeah, also there's Gwazi moves that I see that many dancers learn, but they don't know them as Gwazi moves. But those are, great. You can put that in any part of the routine, really.
That is so true. I'm going to interrupt you for a second to tell me a little story about that. I took a workshop with Shahrazad, who a lot of folks know, who was a recent guest on the Clubhouse, and she taught a Gawazi technique and aesthetics workshop specifically. And I swear, half of the things that she did were things that my teacher taught in our basics class. And then one of the things that Shahrazad, one of her tacks for teaching that was saying, let's look at the original Gawazi styling, and then let's look at how you adapt that for a more lifted Oriental look. And my teacher had a very kind of grounded, flat-footed look. And so the Gawazi stuff was exactly the way I learned it, and the adaptation was exactly the way I tweaked it once I started studying with other teachers some more to get different perspectives. So, like, seconds for that. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Please continue.
So that was all I really had to add. Also, it's valuable to learn. A lot of people associate Saidi with cane, but there's a lot of Saidi you can do without a cane.
Excellent. All right. So let's start talking about some of the ingredients of folkloric dance and the things that go into it. So to get started, what are some of the challenges in presenting a participatory dance as a show?
Well, I'll start. I'll let Margaret chime in because she's got something. But there's a saying that folkloric dance is more fun to watch. More fun to do than it is to watch. For example, there's a nightclub up in the Finland called the Sahara. It's a Lebanese club, and it's debkey all night long. It's fabulous. You get up, everyone's debkeying and stomping, and the music's great. But if you're sitting in like a table watching, it doesn't mean anything to you. So the biggest challenge is to capture that energy and that fun in a way that can be put on stage.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And so, go ahead.
Okay, one of the challenges is if you are presenting the dance in a show, to make it really interesting, you really need to create a choreography using folkloric steps of the particular dance. You add other dance movements to form a choreography. And then, of course, you're also looking at staging the dance so that you want to change the levels during your dance. You want to change patterns. You want to do, various formations, which you wouldn't see in the village. So it's not just getting up and doing a debkey, but you have to make it interesting so that the audience wants to continue watching.
And what are some of the ingredients of a good folkloric performance? When you guys, as a troupe presenting these things, are saying, okay, we want to do this particular folk dance, what are all the things that you have to put into it to make it interesting to the audience?
Well, I think this was codified for us. Katya of Boston always presented this when she was teaching us folkloric choreography. There's three main ingredients that you always have to consider are character. That's the character of the culture that you're presenting. Costuming and music. So I'll start backwards. The music has got to be authentic. You can't take shortcuts here. You can't use anything you want. If you're dancing a Bedouin choreography, it has to be Bedouin music. If you're dancing, a Turkish Ottoman style dance, you've got to use Ottoman music. You just can't take any shortcuts. And character, and this is kind of interesting and a bit of a challenge. Sometimes, when we're dancing Oriental, we're presenting ourselves and how we interpret the music. But you can't do that when you're dancing folkloric choreography or folklore dance. You've got to present the character of the people that you're representing. And lastly, costuming. Costuming should be as I say authentic, should be as representative as possible. But again, Katya always said that it was the line of the costume that was important, the most important.
And are there any particular additional staging considerations that you have to take into account as well?
Well, first of all, is the size of the stage, because being one person on a stage is one thing, but being 7 to 8 people is a very different situation. When we did our first show as Origins, we performed it at the Athenian Corner. Now, the people who have been to the Athenian Corner know that that dance stage is very small. And except for one dance where the whole troupe were together, let me rephrase it. We had a few dances where all the members of the group were together doing a choreography. We restaged that day on that dance floor ahead of the program to make sure that we could fit all 7 of us on the stage. Also, you have to know how many of the dancers in the troupe are available. That changes how you're going to stage the dance. People might have to move to different positions. Sometimes you need to look at physical limitations of the members of your troupe. For instance, I cannot do a lot of hop, skipping, and jumping anymore. So, we look at ways of how do we still present this. We are going to be doing a Lebanese step key in March, and one of the steps is very high energy hopping. I can't do it anymore. So what we're probably going to do is have some of the members who can do that particular step do it in front of the others, and we will be the village women clapping and urging them on. So you need to be very adaptable.
And just follow on that, another good example of that is I have RSI, repetitive strain injury in my wrist. And I can't do cane dances with the rest of the troupe because to present cane really well on stage, all have to be synchronized, and I just can't keep up. I can't synchronize my cane, so that's just how that works. So.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the village women in the background, and that actually leads me to one of my next questions. Is when you are talking about character and presenting the people, can you tell me about how you make character decisions both as a troupe as a whole and as individuals within the troupe?
Well, you mean like as individuals? I think maybe it might be a definition of character. We're talking about character as more of a culture of the culture as opposed to individuals. Does that make sense?
I think I'm actually asking about both. So, I guess I've got 2 questions there. So, first, why don't I ask you about how do you research what type of character is appropriate for the culture of the dance that you're representing?
Well, first of all, you can go to your sources. We at Origins, we're very lucky. We have some excellent sources: Sarah Saida, Katya, Mowena Isaf, Hardy Campbell, so that we can go to them and say, we would like to do a Lebanese women's scarf dance. What is the character of that dance? It's elegant, it's soft, whereas if we want to do an Egyptian Bawazi, you're going to be getting very earthy, very sassy. So we would go to our sources to find out the character. We would then go back with the dance, work on it, work on our presentation of character, and then go back to our sources and say, do we have the right flavor? Do we have the right character? And then we just keep working on it and polishing it until we have gotten the best we can do.
Excellent.
And sometimes the dance, though, the character is affected by the geography. For example, in the Nubian dances, that part of Africa is very hot. Our dances are very loose-limbed and kind of slow, and we're trying to portray, the geography and the environment of what it used to be Nubia, now it's Sudan. So that's another way that character can be portrayed.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think the second part of the question that I had started formulating is, one of the things that I've seen both Origins and other folkloric dance troupes do is kind of present a little bit of a tableau where there are distinct characters who are different people interacting in different ways during the presentation. Can you tell us about how that works and how you make choices around that?
Or the mingling.
That's our term for it.
Mingling, I love it.
Yes.
Margaret, you should take that one.
I'm trying to formulate an answer. Well, part of it is, again, you're going from the basic character of the dance. And then, like any group, and since we're all women, any group of women, you're going to have, various personalities. So, since I am the oldest of the members, I usually end up being, the mother figure in the group. Others will be the younger young woman who is, checking out the men in the area, but doing it very discreetly. And we also often like to add a little humor into our dances, not all of them, but some of them. We do a fellaheen, Egyptian fellaheen, where we're going to the well for water, and we end up at the end pretending to throw the water at the audience. So,
we're like young girls, goofing off. I call it, that dance I nickname, You Had One Job, because it's the girls that are supposed to go to the well and get water, and they goof off instead. But Margaret, tell them we even have a male character.
Yes. Choreography by Mama Greta. It's called Ewa. And again, it's a village girl. They're in grinding coffee, and there is at a table, either reading a book or smoking a hookah. There is a quote-unquote man who is kind of looking at the young ladies, and some of the young ladies are flirting with the man, and it's always who's going to end up with him at the end. And oftentimes one of the troupe is dressed up as the guy.
Nice. Now, this kind of explicit narrative content, not explicit in the sense of X-rated, but explicit in the sense of clearly communicated narrative content is not something that we usually see in belly dance per se. So why is it such a big deal in folkloric dance?
Well, again, we're trying to present the dance in a context, because not everyone is as familiar maybe with the culture we're presenting. So we put a story around it. For example, we have a dance called the Skandarani, which is an Alexandrian dance. And Alexandria was a very big tourist port. And the dance is kind of, the Alexandrians are making fun of the tourists. So there's a whole presentation of the dancers carrying pocketbooks and parading around and making fun of the tourists. So it's just like, again, it just adds some more story and context around for the background of the culture.
Excellent. And what advice do you have when it comes to costuming a folkloric performance?
Well, that's the advice. Well, but in terms of advice, well, you should have some costumes. We try to be as authentic as possible, but sometimes doesn't always work. For example, we used to have a Siwan choreography, a dance in the Siwan Oasis, and those costumes can be kind of expensive. So, but we ended up using basically a black galabea to perform in, which you would probably see at the Oasis. So again, it's honoring the line and the overall line of the costuming and the origins of the culture, but it's not an exact Siwan dress. I think it's another example is our fellahin dresses, and actually it's not just our fellahin dresses. A fellahin, by the way, that's an Egyptian farmer. And the fellahin dresses you see us dancing, and probably many other folkloric troupes, is probably not what you're going to see on a fellahin woman. The dress looks somewhat similar, like we'll have a yoke and a ruffle, but and this was probably codified by Mohammed Reza. They made the dresses like with all this volume, so you could pick up the edge of the dress and dance with it. But that was an adaptation made for the stage. Again, you wouldn't see an actual Egyptian woman farmer wearing a voluminous dress. Her dresses are probably more straight. But we always wear like a tarha, they call it. It's the long veil, and then we put pom poms. And that's all part of the fellahin aesthetic.
So how much detail does? Oh, go ahead.
I think some other examples. Our Nubian, we have a new Nubian choreography we've introduced, and it's actually something that's usually performed by men. So we've adapted a Nubian men's costume. Actually, Karen Kemsky put it together from I don't know what, but it looks great. She edged it like Nubians are known for like a lot of bright colors, very like graphical kind of styling. And she just trimmed this tunic and pants, and we've got a Nubian costume.
Nice.
Talking about affordability. Now, if you're lucky enough to have somebody going over to the country that you're going to be performing the dance from, then you have a good chance of not paying too much money for a costume. We have Nubian dresses, which we got over in Egypt, but we had somebody going over and taking measurements and going to one of the costume shops so that we got it for a reasonable price, and because they could bring it back in their luggage, we didn't have to pay shipping. But other things, you can find a good seamstress who is willing to work with you and, getting them a pattern. That is a good way. We've also have found clothing items that we have adapted. We had a pharaonic.
Yes, I have to tell that story. My mother found our pharaonic costumes at Kohl's. Yes, our pharaonic dresses come from Kohl's. In the teen section, no less. It's just that with a very columnar dress, black, with a gold bodice, collar that it kind of like went up the front or sternum and then around the neck. It just looks very pharaonic. Again, it was a line, but they were $20 each. $20. Yes.
Wow.
Our Hagala dresses, yes, come from Macy's. Margaret found those. they were red dresses. And again, we done our research. We looked at the videos that Retta. There's a lot of Mama Retta's videos on YouTube. And Margaret was just looking through her flyers one day. She found a dress that works for the Hagala. And then the Hagala apron actually came from Kohl's. It was a Ralph Lauren skirt that we adapted into the apron that you see Hagala dancers wear. So if you're like creative and keep your eyes open, you can really costume yourself nicely on a budget.
Nice. Now, you've emphasized the need to go with, to focus on the line or maybe even the silhouette of the costume. When it comes to detail, how much detail does a stage costume need to communicate that authentic look?
I think it depends on the dance you're doing. For example, we have a couple of Bedouin dances in our repertoire. One's an Egyptian Bedouin dance and one's a Levantine Bedouin. Those are distinct costumes. The Bedouins are all over in the Middle East, but they are different groups. They have different costuming. Different clothing, different ways they adorn their clothing. So our Levantine Bedouin dresses are different than our Egyptian Bedouin. But that's particular to that culture. Like I think for other kind of dances, you don't need that level of authenticity. It's enough, like I said, in the Fellaheen, to have like the yoke and the ruffle and the tarha. So I think we have to go on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm. All right, and let's say that folks are total like costuming history nerds, and they love pouring through old photos and videos and paintings and all that stuff. And they have the ability to make a perfect reproduction of a folkloric costume. Are there still adaptations that you need to make sure that those things still read on a stage or in a performance context versus in the social context that they were meant for?
Want to take that one, Margaret? They probably have to be bright. Like a lot of I'd say any costume. There's a lot of folkloric or folk costume can tend to be dark. So we do have to make sure it reads well on stage in terms of coloring. And we can't do any beads. Can't do any sequins. Trying to think.
But again, it depends on the dance you're doing. When we do our Tunisian dance, at the time, we didn't have access to the Malaya that they use to cover their dress. So instead, we bought some bright material and made a Malaya out of that. So we don't have the exact thing, but we had the line of it. And it happens that the Tunisians can be very colorful, so that we had bright colors for the underskirt, for the Malaya, for the headscarf. So you need to add as much color as you can. Again, the jewelry helps as an accessory. Oftentimes, a lot of the dances call for a necklace, which often looks like a wedding necklace, which you can actually buy not very expensively, which you can use for many different dances. We also usually wear earrings, again for a little color, even though they're usually the coin ones, not, glitzy, sparkly ones.
Actually, Margaret, to your point about the Tunisian costume, traditionally Tunisian dancers they call it a fibula to hold the Malaya on their shoulders. And yes, that's a Roman term because Romans occupied North Africa. But the fibulas are very plain pins. But Margaret has, so I'll get brooches that are sparkly because we're on the stage. and they catch the light. So there's an adaptation, Nadira, to your point.
Mhm.
Traditionally the fibulars would be not as glitzy, but we do get glitzier jewelry, so it'll just catch the light and show better on stage.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because when I was very little, my mom was in a Polish folkloric troupe, and the very first sewing I ever did was helping her decorate her costume vest, and then later I had my own because I got to ride in a parade with the dance school and all that stuff. And when I saw a traditional one, like one that was actually from Poland, like as part of like folk dress as opposed to a stage folkloric costume, to my eyes, it looked really dull and really plain because not dull and plain, that's a bad way of putting it, but it used a lot of like more dull beadwork. So things like glass and coral, as opposed to the shiny beads. Whereas we had decorated our costumes with like bugle beads and sequins. And so the reason that we did that was we were making much bolder and simpler motifs than the actual ones that would have been worn, just in Polish villages, because everybody in the village was seeing them up close and everyone who was seeing ours was seeing them from far away. And so when you included that level of detail, the motif wasn't visible. But when you were watching it from a stage, you needed something simpler, sparklier, and bolder. And also, they were the performers, and so they got to more glittery things than people would wear in real life.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's mostly like you have to. It's a good point that you made. It's like you have to be able to see all this from far away, or further than you would normally, like in a village.
Nice. All right, so I'd like to dig a little bit back into that kind of third leg of the tripod, which was the music. I think even as belly dancers, one of our challenges is figuring out what's appropriate. We inherit certain kind of chestnuts that we know are appropriate, but there's always this huge ocean of music, and sometimes it's tricky to tell not just what's from what culture, but what the context of a particular song is. And so you can't necessarily tell just by listening to it what it goes with. Do you have any tips for finding appropriate doing the research to find appropriate music?
Well, just assuming that the dancer wants to perform a certain ethnic style, right? Okay. Well, I guess I would start with their teacher. Presumably, they're studying with a teacher who's teaching them the fine points of their dance. If they're learning choreography, their music that'll come with that. There's music that'll come with that, of course. But yeah, you learn when you start studying folkloric dance, you learn if there's modern versions of the music, you learn who's got music, But some other good sources are Aisha Ali is a great source. She's done a lot of field recordings, not just she's known for her gwazi, but she's done a lot of other field recordings of North African music. Shara's a good source. Yeah, I guess I would start with your teacher and find out who they listen to and where they get their music.
All right. So, the last section I'd like to ask you about, well, actually, before we do that, was there anything else that you wanted to say about the ingredients, character, costume, music, or anything else before we move on to the next section?
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
All right. So the last group of questions that I wanted to ask you is about being responsible dance citizens. So in your opinion, what responsibilities do we have when we present another culture's folk dances on stage?
Well, you really have to do your research into the background of a dance. So basically study with either a dancer from the culture or a dancer who has studied that dance and the culture. And again, as much accuracy as you can. Again, you go back to the music, to the costuming, and, the steps to the character.
So, what steps can we do to make sure that we are presenting them accurately?
Well, when we do a dance, if we choreograph it ourselves, then we will find, again, one of our resources, say we're doing a Lebanese dance. I would then go to Morwenna Asaf and show it to her and say, does this represent, what can we change, what can we make better? And we keep doing that until we feel that we have gotten, the flavor of the dance and the accuracy of it. But you need to have some source. You can also watch videos to see, photos, videos, online videos of dancing. If you're going to be doing a Nubian dance, make sure when you're watching the videos, it's a troupe from Nubia, because that would be closer to the source than, say, a group that has looked at something and then taken it on. So the closer to the source, the better your accuracy is going to be.
So you don't play that game of telephone?
Game of telephone?
That's a game that kids play where
yes,
yeah.
Yes, okay. I was going to say, talking.
So everybody whispers it along in a circle, and then by the end, it may have turned into something else.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
All right.
exactly.
All right. So one of the terms that gets floated around there a lot, and sometimes it's used as a criticism, and sometimes it's used with love, but it's folklore, right? When you're presenting something with a folkloric flavor, but not necessarily trying to present an accurate folkloric representation. Do you feel like there's room for that in the dance world as long as it's labeled appropriately?
So, by example, like if somebody gets on a stage and uses a lot of skirts.
Now, that's a good example,
I'm
right?
trying to think like what would be folklore,
All right, let me throw out pharaonic is folklore. We do not know what a pharaonic dance looks like. Yeah, we can go to the temples, to the paintings in Egypt, and you look and you say, all right, that's the dancer. But how they went from one pose to another, we don't know. We don't really know what their music sounded like. So pharaonic would be folklore.
That's a great example.
That would be presented as, this is our interpretation of the paintings of the temples of Egypt, and that would be folklore.
Right. So that's a good example, Margaret, because and that's exactly like what our program notes read when we did present that dance. So we don't know how this actually was done. We just tried to be true again to the line of costuming and the presented the poses. So yes, to your point, dear, I think that if you say up front, we don't know, this is how we think it might have been, but this is our interpretation, it probably covers a lot of ground.
All right. And, one of the complicated things about any discussion of authenticity in any context is that all art grows and changes, including dance and including folk dances. So, how do you balance the need to authentically present folk dance with the idea that it's a living dance and not a museum piece?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, I attended Kareem Nagy's Arabic dance seminar, which I recommend, by the way, to any student of folkloric dance last year. And the theme was immigrants, and he talked about that. He talks about immigrants will come here to America, and they bring their culture with them and their dances that they knew at the time. Meanwhile, back in the old country, things move on. So it's just something to be aware of. The dance that you're doing here is fixed at a certain point in time, and but if you go back to let's say Armenia or Lebanon, you might see a lot of differences because the dance has moved. And actually, our Nubian suite is a great reflection of that. We do a classical Reda Nubian choreography, and then we also present a choreography that several troupe members learned earlier this year in Egypt, a current one. And I can't remember the name of the teacher. Margaret, can you help me out?
Ashra.
Right. that was something that he's just choreographed and this year and taught them. And so we sort of have like classical and modern. And so I think it's a great point, and it's a really good thing for us to be aware of and to think about and as we present these dances.
Now, one of the things that seems a little tough about that is, at the same time, you don't want to present, kind of a stale version of something as the only way it's done. But at the same time, old things still have value. Like we don't discount classical music because it's, hundreds of years old. We don't, say that all, swing music is not valuable because it's decades old. If you are going to be presenting older versions of things, do you have any recommendations for helping people understand how they fit into the puzzle or how to present them to the audience so that they know what they're looking at?
Let me think. So, like, let's take Retta again. I mean, so if you're presenting, I mean, it's just probably knowing where your choreography comes from, and how it was originally done, maybe. And you can take some liberties with it. Like we've adapted some choreographies to suit us, but as long as you know and learn the original, you probably you can have some leeway to modernize it a little bit. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
It's funny. I was thinking there's classical. I mean, there's classical folklore. Like we've learned like Kamea, which is the other dance troupe of Egypt, and then there's Retta. And we tend to think of these as they're very iconic presentations. But I think that's part of it. You learn those, but you also got other sources to learn from as well. And that probably helps keep your own presentations fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and nowadays with YouTube and all, you can see dances that are recently choreographed from the various regions. When I was over in Egypt in February, we went to a presentation of all kinds of folk dances from around the world, and some of the groups that danced were from the government troops that we had talked about, and again, those would be considered more modern than probably what Mahmoud Reda did back in the 50s. And Mahmoud Reda's choreographies have changed because he was choreographing up until early 2000s. So, he kept evolving also. So as you said, it's a living dance. And though we're presenting a Debke, there's so many versions of the Debke that, it's still changing.
Mm-hmm. And if you do present, an older version to the audience, let's say, it is, a more vintage piece, from Retta's first couple of decades, would you do something to explain that to the audience, or would you not feel that to be necessary?
If we have the opportunity, we always, try to explain what the dance is, where it comes from, and who choreographed it. So yes, we would say this is, for instance, Gwazi. If you look at the costuming of Gwazi dances, you have what the Muslim sisters still wear to back during the Ottoman Empire, when they had harem pants and long coats. So you would want to explain the difference.
Mm-hmm. All right. And, are there any particular resources that you recommend for studying folkloric dance?
Oh, there's many. We'll start with the local ones. You've got Shadia Tomei. Not only is she a costumer, but she's a great dancer and choreographer. We've Katya. Somebody's fairly new on the scene the past couple of years, but she's a wonderful dancer, and she's from Morocco, Sumaya Moroz. You've got Kay Hardy Campbell, who's up in Maine, teaches Khaleesi. There's an Iranian dancer, Sheila Egbali, who teaches, she has a school of Iranian dance. And there's also NEFA, New Folk Festival. That happens every year in April. Don't go with this year because we have our event happening. I'll tell you about that in a minute. The New Folk Festival has everything from Morris dancing to Scandinavian dancing. We perform there. There've been other Middle Eastern dancers and tribal dancers who perform there. It's a great weekend. It's more for immersion as opposed to studying, but you make a lot of connections there. For a good time, and I recommend Balkan Night. It's a New England tradition, Boston tradition in March in Concord. You see a lot of dancers there, and you see a lot of musicians. Mike Reagan used to play there a lot. It's just all kinds of Balkan folk dancing. And you know what? Just for participatory reasons, go to your church festivals. Go to the Greek festivals. Go to the Armenian Kets. Go to the Maharajan, which is a Lebanese church festival. There's always great music and always great dancing, and it's a great way to immerse yourself. Mm-hmm. And then, Margaret, do you want to take the other resources?
Yes. Coming up next April, Origins and Amity Elise are having a 2-day workshop on folkloric dance. It's April 21st to the 22nd. It's up in White River Junction, Vermont, and we're having Kay Hardy Campbell, who's going to be doing Kaligi, Samantha Berenstein, who's out of Toronto, who is going to be doing an introduction to North African dance, and Morwenna Isaf is coming up to do Lebanese Debki and Lebanese Samad. Also, Sarah Saida is going to be down at the Ancient Art Studio in March, presenting her Journey Through Egypt 1 and 2. And then, of course, there's always Kareem Nagy when he's around. So there is a lot of teachers who can do folklore, but you have to look for them.
Mm-hmm. And for folks who are outside of New England, there are some additional folks that you guys have been mentioning throughout, so particularly Sahra Saida. Is there anyone else that you'd like to add to that list?
Oh, Kareem Nagy, who used to be ours, but he's moved to Chicago. But he travels all over the country, so I'm sure you'll find him somewhere. But he's got a website. But he's a wonderful teacher, and he does teach like folkloric dance.
There's Artemis.
Artemis. Right. There's Amel Talsouf. She teaches North African dance, and she's based in California, I think. There's Aisha Ali.
Laura
Victoria Gray in Washington. She teaches dance of the Silk Road. Gosh.
Kamala Dalal.
Oh, yeah, she's wonderful. Kamala Dalal, yep.
There is a male dancer, Lebanese Simon, out of Texas, who does fantastic Lebanese debkis.
We actually list many of these people and more on our website, so you get under resources.
Excellent. Well, why don't I link to that directly in the show notes? So I'll ask you for that before I go, Amy, unless it's an easy to say URL.
It's originsfolkloricdance.com, and I believe you can go right to the resources.
Great. And then I will link straight there instead. Excellent. All right. We are getting to the end of the call already. That just blew by.
Yes, it did.
Anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to bring up?
Well, people might want to see us dancing. We're going to be at Cafe Rocks in February 25th. And then
so for listeners, that's in the Boston area in Somerville.
And then Suad's Master Class Seminar in March 10th, which is down at Connecticut College in Connecticut. I want to say Groton, Connecticut, but I'm not sure. You'd have to look it up.
I'll make sure that we get that in the show notes so we can get you guys a direct link.
Great.
Excellent. All right. And if there's one thing that people take away from this call, what would you want that to be?
Well,
You can
we were
answer that
talking about
separately
it,
if you
like,
like.
what would we want them to learn? uh, that is, it's. I think folkloric dance is a lot of fun, and I think, I think if a well-rounded dancer should know at least a little bit about where the dance comes from. And it's worthwhile to always you don't have to perform it. You could just take some classes just to round yourself out and sort of get the flavor, about these cultures where this art that we love comes from.
All right. And Margaret, did you want to answer that for yourself too, or are you mostly on board with Amy's selection?
I'm mostly on board. The other thing is folkloric dances, unless it's a small part of an Oriental routine, really should be done with a group of people. Keying by yourself doesn't quite do it.
Yes.
All right.
And again, it's fun, and that's, I think, what has kept Origins as a growing troupe, is because we have fun. We have fun learning together. We have fun performing together. So basically, dance is fun.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to the question and answer section. So if there's anybody who is listening in who would like to ask a question, or maybe even share your favorite takeaway or your own story from folkloric dance, we would love to hear from you. If you are just on the webcast and not calling in, you can type that in using the question box on the right. So it looks like a little speech bubble with 3 dots. Or if you're on the phone and you'd like to speak to us, you can press star to unmute yourself. So that's star on your phone or on the Skype keypad. And we would love to hear from you, so please don't be shy. All right, it looks like we've got Rose. Hi, Rose.
Hi, I enjoyed listening to this very much. My story is backwards because I started with international folk dancing since I was 16, and I didn't start doing belly dancing and related stuff until I was 50. So I came around backwards from what most people have been talking about this evening. And in the course of my youth, we had a teacher from Duquesne University who taught at my university as a visitor. And the Duquesne University still performs, they're called the tambourines, and they still travel around during this time of year. They'll be here, I think, in my area in February. And they do a variety of international dances as performance groups. And they've sort of spread out, and they're doing what I would consider folk dances, but in mostly as groups and sometimes as individuals. Has anybody ever seen or familiar with them?
No, but I'd be interested sometime to see them. Where are you located?
I live in Bethesda, Maryland, and they're going to be performing at a local venue in February. But they're traveling around the country as a group now, and I don't know what their schedule is. It's pretty cool. They're from Duquesne University, which has a large ethnic population, and started out from that group. Some of the students are still.
If they make it up this way, I'm sure we'll go see them.
Yeah,
Cool.
They're a lot of fun.
That actually reminds me of something, Rose, and that's that, if somebody's interested in taking up folkloric dance, there are a whole lot of social folk dancing clubs out there that can be a really good entryway into that. So, a lot of folks can go the route that Origins did, which is where, you learn staged folkloric dance from folks. But if you just kind of want to try it out and see what you like, especially in Boston where we've got, 50 universities and 50 square miles, often you can just drop in on the MIT Folk Dance Club on, Tuesday nights in this building, and everybody's welcome. And you can just go in and try a bunch of things, and, people will just teach you them when you show up. And it doesn't have to be any kind of formal thing. And that can often be a really good way to get an introduction and kind of catch the bug and see what you like before you take a more formalized approach.
Yeah, I think many schools, universities have folk dance clubs. We used to go to Syracuse University when I was at Cornell, and there was a big group that came from all over and performed for each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we would practice, and then we would choreograph something to do at this like festival of different schools that would get together. But that was years ago, back in the 50s.
And for listeners, if your local universities don't open up their clubs to the public, I would also check out things like meetup.com, which can be a great way to, kind of find things that are open to everybody. But also, like, coming from a university background, I would also say that, like, often you can just walk in off the street and nobody will know.
Yeah. Yeah, I started when I was in high school going to Columbia University, which was just up the road from where I lived, before I was even in college. Okay,
Nice.
well, that's all I had to say.
Well, thank you, Rose. That was really helpful.
Thanks a lot.
All right, so I'm going to mute Rose, and if anybody else would like to ask a question or share a story or suggestion, we would love to hear from you. So one more time, that's star to unmute yourself. All right, well, it sounds like that might be it for today. Well, thank you again, ladies.
Thank you for having us. Yes, thank you so much. It's been fun.
All right, and thank you everybody for coming. This is the end of the call, but that doesn't mean that our conversation has to end. We've got a private Facebook group just for Clubhouse listeners, so we'll send out a link to that when we send out the call recording. And that email will also include a link to some of the resources that we've mentioned on the call. So if you missed a name or a link, don't worry, we'll have that available to you. And also a link to our feedback survey. So if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers or other ways that we can improve the Clubhouse, I would love to hear it. We are actually booked almost a full year out with guests, so I'm not adding anybody new to the schedule right now, but I would love to hear what you're interested in because I will be starting to book the second half of 2018 in a little bit, or the last couple months. And our last call is still to be scheduled. We have a guest picked out, but not the date yet, so I'm not going to announce it. So keep an eye on your inbox for that information. And the last thing that I want to say is that this is the come on in kind of Clubhouse, not the no boys allowed kind. So if you know anybody who would like to join us, you can invite them to do so at bellydancegeek.com/clubhouse. And until next time, happy dancing. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.